Think about the last time you looked at a map. You probably expect it to show you, objective reality.
Right, like roads, rivers, that kind of thing.
Exactly. It's
Mm.
just a literal neutral place of things. You look at it and it tells you the physical coordinates of, say, where you're standing and where the nearest coffee shop is.
Yeah, it's an entirely dispassionate representation of the physical world. I mean, the map doesn't care if you're going to the coffee shop for a first date or to break up with someone. It just shows you the pavement.
But imagine a thought experiment for a second. Imagine a map that didn't show you what was physically there, but instead it showed you how much you cared about what was there.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. What if a road only materialized on the paper if it helped you, like, get a promotion at work? Or what if a river only showed up in bright red ink because you were absolutely terrified of drowning?
I mean, if you possess an object like that, you wouldn't really be looking at geography anymore. You'd be looking at a schematic of your own psyche. You'd be looking at a map of meaning.
Which brings us directly to the landscape we are navigating today. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking a dense, highly ambitious, and incredibly polarizing 1999 book.
Very polarizing.
Oh, wildly. It's called Maps of Meaning, The Architecture of Belief by Canadian psychologist Jordan Peterson. And the stack of sources we are using to decode this is just a completely wild mix.
Yeah, we're pulling from excerpts of the book itself, transcripts of Peterson's university lectures, and some very glowing reviews from independent blogs.
But also some absolutely blistering take-no-prisoners critiques, right?
Exactly, from places like Psychology Today and Current Affairs magazine, and we even have a blog post from an estate planning law firm.
Which sounds completely bizarre, I know, but it actually provides the most profound real-world application of this entire theory, which we'll get to.
It really does.
So if you've ever felt completely overwhelmed by the sheer unpredictable chaos of life, or, if you've ever watched someone cling so fiercely to their personal beliefs that they ignore all logical evidence, this deep dive is going to hand you a completely new lens for viewing human behavior.
Because to understand why people cling to those grand narratives or mythological beliefs, Peterson argues we first have to look at the microscopic level.
Like how the human brain actually processes reality second by second.
Exactly. The foundational claim of the book is that we do not experience the world as that neutral place of things we just talked about.
Because our brain simply can't process that much objective data, right? Like,
Hmm.
if you walk into a room, you aren't calculating the structural engineering of the ceiling.
No. Or staring at microscopic dust particles, you would be paralyzed by the sensory overload. So, to survive, the brain filters out almost everything. It turns the physical world into what he calls a forum for action.
A forum for action.
Right. You only perceive what is relevant to your goals. You scan the room and you see pathways, you see obstacles, and you see tools.
And the sources refer to this filtering system as the cybernetic frame, which, to understand cybernetics, we have to look at folks like Norbert Wiener, who worked on guided missile defense systems.
Yeah, and the mechanism of a guided missile is actually a perfect analogy for human motivation here. A missile operates on a continuous feedback loop.
It has a starting point and a target.
Exactly. And it constantly measures the gap between itself and that target. If it drifts off course, it registers an error, adjusts its trajectory, and keeps moving. Peterson argues that human consciousness is fundamentally cybernetic in that same way.
So we are always situated at point A.
Yes, which he describes as the unbearable present.
Unbearable because I guess if you were perfectly satisfied, you just wouldn't move. You wouldn't act.
You just sit there forever.
Right. So my point A right now might be the unbearable present of, like, being hungry. And my point B, my target, is the fantasized future of having a sandwich.
And that A to B navigation system is the engine that actually generates your emotions. Emotion isn't just some random weather pattern in your brain.
It's an internal compass.
Exactly. It's evaluating your progress on that cybernetic map. Positive emotion isn't just a baseline state. It's the neurological reward you get when the gap between you and the sandwich decreases.
And negative emotion strikes the exact moment an obstacle appears on your path. It's like using a GPS app on your phone.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, like when you're driving to a destination, you are entirely indifferent to the beautiful architecture of the houses you pass.
The architecture is completely irrelevant to your goal. You only care about the blue line on the screen.
But the second a road closed sign pops up, you feel this spike of immediate, visceral frustration. And your anger isn't because the physical asphalt is somehow offensive.
No, it's because your map to the goal is broken. The world isn't behaving the way you predicted, and your assumption about the future has collapsed.
And we start building these predictive maps incredibly early in human development, don't we? The sources pull a really great example from the book involving a toddler.
Yeah, picture a baby girl exploring her house. And she reaches up onto a counter to grab a fragile, highly expensive glass sculpture.
A completely terrifying moment for any parent.
Truly. So the child observes the objective sensory facts, right? That the object is shiny, it's smooth, it's cold. But then her mother interferes. She grasps the child's hand, pulls it away, and scolds her loudly.
So in that moment, the child isn't just learning objective material properties about glass.
Right. She is learning the object's motivational significance. Within her social context, that shiny object now equals danger and parental disapproval.
So for the human mind, essence and significance are just fused together. We categorize things based on what they signify for our behavior.
Exactly. But navigating around a fragile vase or finding a sandwich, those are localized, tiny navigations. What happens when the map has to scale up to encompass the entirety of human existence?
That's where things get mythological.
Yes. This is where Peterson argues these micro-navigations evolve into the universal archetypes of mythology. The form for action gets divided into three constituent elements across, thousands of years of human storytelling.
Let's break those down. The known, the unknown, and the knower.
First, you have the known. This is the explored territory. It's culture, predictable routines, tradition, order. And mythologically, Peterson points out that this is almost universally represented as the Great Father.
Why specifically a father figure? Like, why gender it that way?
Because in ancient human history, the structure of society, the rules, the protection from outside threats, the hierarchy that was typically passed down through patriarchal lines, the father represents the safety of the walls, but also the potential tyranny of strict rules.
Okay, that makes sense.
Second, you have the unknown. This is the unexplored territory. It's nature, sudden disruptions, chaos. Mythologically, this is mapped to the Great Mother.
Because nature is the ultimate source of birth and like the origin of all new things, but it's also incredibly destructive. I mean, a hurricane doesn't care about your plans.
Exactly. Which brings us to the third element, the knower or the hero.
The person caught in the middle.
Right. The hero is the psychological process that mediates between the tyranny of order and the terror of chaos. The hero voluntarily leaves the safety of the known, steps into the unknown to confront a threat, gathers new information, and brings it back to update the map.
So what does a catastrophic map failure look like in real life? The sources use the example of unexpectedly getting fired from a job you've had for a decade.
That is the ultimate collapse. The unbearable present suddenly drops out from under you.
You thought you were safely inside the walls of the known, but you are abruptly plunged into chaos. The predictable rules of your daily routine, your income, your social status, your sense of purpose, they just evaporate.
And to survive that psychological freefall, you have to enact the hero's journey. You have to voluntarily confront the fear, gather new skills, and build a totally new map for your future.
It's a psychological death and a rebirth.
Precisely.
But let me pose a question here, because scaling this up feels a bit intense. Is every single minor inconvenience a mythological descent into the underworld? Like, if I hit a pothole on my commute, am I suddenly battling the dragon of chaos?
Well, the sources clarify that it comes down to scale and existential threat. A pothole forces a minor behavioral correction. You swerve, you might get annoyed, but it doesn't destroy your belief in your ultimate destination. You still believe you are going to work.
Okay, so it's just a bump on the road.
Right. A dragon in this framework is a profound threat that destroys your belief in your ends. But Peterson does argue that we practice this heroic mechanism constantly in miniature ways.
Oh, like the kindergarten example from his lectures.
Yes. He gives this example of a kindergarten child who encounters an aggressively barking dog on the way to school.
So the map from the safety of home to the safety of school is suddenly blocked by this monster at the fence.
Exactly. The child's instinct is to run back to the known to flee home. But if the child voluntarily manages the fear and slowly walks past the dog anyway, they act out a micro-hero narrative.
They incorporate that terrifying anomaly into their map, they discover a new internal courage, and their territory of the known expands.
It's a really powerful way to frame daily challenges.
There's another fascinating example from the sources involving the story of Pinocchio. Peterson analyzes the character of Jiminy Cricket.
Oh, yeah, the bug.
Right. Jiminy's literally a bug. He represents the conscience, the internal voice that irritates you, that bugs you. He is the psychological anomaly pulling you toward a higher aim in your personal narrative.
You can swat the bug away and stay in chaos, or you can let it guide you toward becoming a real boy, a fully realized individual. It's a compelling framework for understanding how we constantly update our worldview.
But if this theory is essentially just a call to face our fears, update our goals, and take personal responsibility, it raises a massive question. Why is Jordan Peterson so incredibly controversial?
It's probably the most vital question when discussing his work.
And before we dive into the culture war aspect, it's worth noting for you listening, our goal here isn't to validate or debunk the political left or the political right. We are just impartially reporting the claims from the sources. We're using the text as a lens to understand why the exact same ideas trigger such violently opposite reactions.
Yeah, the reception to maps of meaning and Peterson's broader philosophy is fundamentally split. One camp sees profound, life-saving wisdom. The other camp sees a dangerous, obscurantist maze.
Let's start with the enthusiasts. We pulled a review from a source called Kyle's Game Development Blog, and he compares reading this book to seeing a pocket watch disassembled.
It perfectly captures the appeal. We all use beliefs in meaning every day, just like we use a watch to tell time, but we have no idea how the gears actually turn.
For readers like Kyle, Peterson provides the blueprint of human motivation. It offers a structured framework for self-discovery without feeling overly preachy.
And it tells people, particularly young men, who might feel adrift in modern society, that their suffering actually has mythological weight.
Right, by taking personal responsibility and being the hero of their own micro-narratives, they can pull themselves out of the abyss.
But the pushback is severe, both academically and politically. Let's look at the critique by Paul Thagard, a philosopher and cognitive scientist writing in Psychology Today.
What does he say?
Well, Thagard attacks the very foundation of Peterson's argument, which relies heavily on Carl Jung's idea that these archetypes, the father, the mother, the hero, are biologically hardwired and universal across all human cultures.
And Thagard essentially says the anthropology just doesn't hold up.
He brings the receipts. Thagard points to the Pirahã people of Brazil, an indigenous group who have absolutely no creation myths.
Wait, really? None at all?
None. They don't map reality through grand ancestral narratives. He also cites the Iroquois, whose cultural myths don't fit Peterson's specific, rigid father-mother-son motif.
So Thagard argues that Peterson is taking a very specific Judeo-Christian lineage and falsely projecting it as the biological default of the entire human species.
Exactly. And Thagard goes further on the philosophical front. He challenges the core premise that humans require ancient myth to form a moral compass.
Oh, this is a crucial counterargument.
Yeah.
Thagard points to secular Enlightenment philosophers like Immanuel Kant and David Hume, right?
Yes. Kant argued that ethics can be derived purely from human reason and logic, the categorical imperative. And Hume argued morality stems from innate human sympathy.
So Thagard's point is that we have centuries of intellectual history proving you don't need archaic stories about dragons to be a good, ethical person.
Right. And the critique gets even sharper and arguably more mocking with Nathan J. Robinson's piece in Current Affairs. Robinson accuses Peterson of obscurantism.
Obscurantism being the practice of burying simple, obvious truths under a mountain of convoluted academic jargon so they appear profoundly original.
Exactly. Robinson breaks down this 17-minute tangent Peterson gives in a lecture about a children's book called There's No Such Thing as a Dragon.
Oh, I remember reading this.
Yeah.
Peterson goes on this massive, winding monologue about a pancake-eating dragon, a sulking child on a porch, and the mammalian play circuit.
Yeah, and Robinson's analysis is that Peterson is just taking a basic truism, the idea that ignoring small problems makes them bigger, and dressing it up in such dense metaphysical and evolutionary language that the listener just feels overwhelmed.
And so the listener assumes, well, I don't fully understand this, so it must be genius.
Right. Robinson concludes the book is a wondrous maze that is ultimately empty of actionable insight.
But the debate isn't just confined to cognitive science or literary critique. The sources show how deeply this spills over into modern culture wars.
Because Peterson's concept of order is inherently political. In his framework, order, which includes tradition, social hierarchy, established culture, is natural and necessary to keep the chaos at bay.
So when Peterson tells his followers to emulate the dominance hierarchies of lobsters, he's using evolutionary biology to justify social inequality.
And his supporters view that as a vital defense of Western tradition. They see it as a necessary pushback against modern victimhood mentalities, arguing that hierarchies are based on competence, not oppression.
But his critics view that exact same framework as an authoritarian rationalization. They argue it justifies oppression as natural.
Yeah, for example, Peterson gained massive international prominence by opposing Canada's Bill C-16, claiming that activists advocating for trans pronouns share the totalitarian philosophy of Maoist China,
Right. He argued that they elevate group identity over the individual, leading to state control.
which critics see as a dangerous, massive leap in logic. They argue Peterson's entire framework is designed to blame individuals for their own suffering.
Like if your life is chaotic, his advice is to clean your room and face your own internal dragon. But critics argue that hyper-focusing on the individual completely ignores real systemic societal failures.
Things like crushing student debt, institutional discrimination, or a broken housing market.
It really operates as a massive psychological Rorschach test. A reader desperately looking for self-help sees a brilliant, empowering demand to take control of their life and stop making excuses.
But a critic analyzes the exact same text and sees a defense of rigid, traditional power structures that punches down at marginalized groups.
The ambiguity of the cybernetic frame allows people to just project their own entire worldview onto it. We have heavy academic warfare, we have intense political polarization, but then hidden deep in our stack of sources, there was this incredibly practical, everyday application of maps of meaning.
I love this part.
Me too. And it comes from a blog post by the McIntyre Elder Law Firm.
This was arguably the most fascinating source to analyze because it takes all of this lofty philosophy and grounds it in mundane reality.
They use Peterson's exact framework of order and chaos to explain the critical importance of writing wills and setting up trusts. Estate planning.
When you view estate planning through the lens of human psychology, it makes profound sense. Facing your own mortality is the ultimate unavoidable encounter with chaos and the unknown.
Because the vast majority of people avoid thinking about dying because it plunges them into unbearable existential anxiety.
So they ignore it. And in this context, the mythological dragon hoarding the gold isn't a literal monster in a cave.
The dragon is procrastination.
Yes. It's denial. It's the sheer paralyzing confusion of navigating probate law. If you die without a plan, you are literally leaving behind a vortex of chaos for your family.
You leave them with the probate courts, interpersonal family conflict, frozen bank accounts, and lost assets. It is a nightmare of disorder for the people you love.
The law firm frames the act of writing a will as the ultimate heroic act.
Which is so brilliant. Usually, setting up a trust is viewed as the most sterile, boring, bureaucratic, administrative chore imaginable.
But viewed through Peterson's lens, bureaucracy is our modern defense against existential chaos. By voluntarily stepping into the unknown, facing your deep terror of death, and putting your financial affairs in order, you are establishing order.
You are acting as the hero who shields your community from unnecessary suffering. It's amazing.
It transforms a sterile legal document into a shield against the void. The objective fact is that you are just filling out paperwork. But the meaning of that action, its motivational significance, is that you are holding back the forces of chaos.
It really proves the underlying thesis. Humans do not run on cold, hard facts. If a lawyer just gives you a list of tax liabilities, you'll put it in a drawer. But if they give you a narrative where you are the protector of your family's future, you act. We need a story to motivate us.
We really do. So synthesizing everything we've covered today, whether you align with the enthusiasts who view maps of meaning as a brilliant, life-saving decoding of human psychology, or whether you align with the critics who view it as a controversial, overcomplicated justification for tradition,
The core premise remains incredibly resonant. We cannot survive without a map.
we absolutely need a story to tell us where we are, where we're going, and what to value along the journey.
But leaving you with one final thought to mull over, Peterson argues that our goals literally construct our perceived reality. Our pursuit of that ideal future, our point B, highlights what is relevant and completely blinds us to the rest,
The things that get in our way become obstacles we target with negative emotion.
which raises an urgent question for modern society. If our individual maps only highlight what we desire and what we fear, what happens when you have to share a civilization with people whose ideal futures require treating you as an obstacle?
How do we possibly build a shared, functioning map of reality when our ultimate destinations are fundamentally opposed?
It makes you wonder, if your map only shows the rivers you're afraid of and the roads that get you what you want, are any of us even driving in the same city?